Welcome back, everybody, to Sabres Chat, presented by Built in Buffalo. I am your host, Luka. It's been a while. I believe it's about been a month since my last episode. This is episode 17. Um, just been really busy. Labor Day weekend, now about 10 days ago or so, of course. Other things going on in my life that just, things with Bill's Chat, our main podcast and channel, and things that we do for that. A lot of other stuff going on that just took my attention away a little bit from this, unfortunately. Do apologize about that for anyone that listens. I appreciate all of you. Be sure to like, subscribe, do whatever it is that you listen to here if you don't already. Appreciate all of you. And look forward to kind of getting into this. At this point in time, it really seems like we're going to be getting back into the swing of things because you can smell hockey in the air right now. You can sense that it's happening. And that's really due to Sabres hockey is back in a kind of way where we have the prospect challenge coming up this weekend, starting off on Friday, the 16th or 15th. Apologies. Um, and it's kind of just that first taste that we're going to get with individuals that are going to be in the system. Individuals we will see in Rochester, of course, continuing to work with the Amerks, maybe even a couple that are going to try to have a very impressive preseason to then move forward and potentially try to crack that Sabres day one roster, or even maybe move their way into the roster later on through the season, or take advantage of opportunities, be priority call-ups, whatever they might be. This is the time where we finally get to watch those guys, not in a 3-on-3, the French Connection tournament that they have. I believe that was in early July during a prospect development camp. This is kind of, you get to see our prospects, the Sabres prospects, up against other teams' prospects. I believe it will be Pittsburgh, Montreal, Boston. I have it up here somewhere. Pittsburgh, Montreal, Boston, Ottawa, and New Jersey. So we get to see them kind of in live play over the weekend, although Monday as well. That's the third day. They don't play on Sunday. And just see what they got. See how they are. You have a couple guys who had, maybe even impressive or a good Amerks playoff run this past season. You have individuals who are coming and playing on North American ice for the first time. A lot of mix and a lot of change in there where it'll be curious to see. And I have a bunch of guys, or not a bunch, I should say. I highlighted a few guys that I really have my eye on. Some of what I've called the quote unquote obvious names, and then also a few maybe more unknown names that I kind of have my eye on a little bit. I think one of them is a little bit more unknown than the other, but overall, individuals that maybe you don't hear of every day when it comes to the prospects and the guys that we have in the line in the chain, but could be fun to watch, could be interesting, and could maybe after a strong development camp or after a strong showing in this prospect challenge, then have maybe a strong preseason where they get some more thought than what we thought they would have at this point in time. So we will get into that later in this episode, but I wanted to start off with kind of something that came out of recent where, as per After the Whistles, Andrew Peters, a trusted source of his, came out and basically gave him the green light and understanding that Rasmus Dahlin has an 8-year, $10.5 million annual contract extension kind of ready to go and will be signed during the preseason or, coming up real soon. And it's kind of, we heard that come July 1st from another individual who I'm blanking on right now, and I do apologize not giving the credit that is due. There was an individual who had come out and said that Rasmus Dahlin had an 8-year, $9.5 million annual extension lined up and would be signed. I believe, I don't quote me again. Memory's a little fuzzy. I don't have this as my notes in front of me, and I do apologize about that. But I believe it was either noted that it would be happening on July 1st or around July 1st. And then the days and weeks and then even months now have passed. And it was kind of a question of, where did that come from? What was the validity of that? Did, unfortunately, this individual hear information that came from a source that was no longer valid, or it was old news, whatever it may be? And you kind of feel a little bit bad for someone that kind of stuck their neck on the line and their reputation on the line to put out something that seemed like a very confident thing that turns out not to be the case. Not that it was far off. And obviously, now that we've seen this 8-year, 10.5 million annual contract being discussed, again, it's $1 million a year, so on and so forth. It does feel like that jump from 9.5 to 10.5 is substantial. Just based on appearance and then what it does to the cap, of course, and everything like that. But overall, it seems like the writing's been on the wall. Maybe they just had to work out a few details. Maybe that extra million was kind of that thing that got it over the hump. We still haven't even seen it signed yet. So until we see a confirmation and a signature on what it is, this is all kind of rumors, hearsay, whatever you want to call it. But we're going to have a discussion a little bit, or I want to have a discussion and talk about, kind of when I first heard that from an individual like, Peters on After the Whistle, and then him and Rive kind of discussed it at length on theirs. If you, for whatever reason, are listening to myself and do not listen to After the Whistle, I highly suggest it. It's a great daily listen. It's a nice short little listen. Get your fill. Those guys are great, very entertaining, very, very awesome podcast. But it really is, and I think they hit on a great point. And I think it's a discussion that needs to be had, and kind of just give my 2 cents on. I would love to talk about is it's a 2-part question in its own right on how to feel about it. And the first question really comes down to, is it worth it for a player himself? Is Rasmus Dahlin worth that figure and length and everything like that? Length, 1 billion%. And that number, to me personally, it's got, I don't know if this is an NFL mindset. I don't know if this is just me kind of thinking about certain things. To me, I've heard individuals, and the reason I said NFL mindset is I've heard it more in that landscape. You can't overpay elite talent. And so this discussion about, is it too much or is it worth it for a player like Rasmus Dahlin? If you feel, which I do, by the way, that this is an elite player and he will progress and even become even more elite, his ceiling still hasn't even been met at the age that he finds himself. You cannot overpay that. It's something you need to secure. And on top of that, having a cornerstone defenseman for your franchise moving forward in this generation that we find ourselves at the beginning of, and this team that will hopefully go places that we would like them to go, you need that guy. And whatever the number needs to be needs to happen. So if his representation came in and was like, they want 8 years, 10.5 million, you go through your own negotiations, you figure it out, find a number that both sides like, but then you offer it up and you do not question it. And I firmly believe that there is no such thing as overpaying elite talent, the greats. This would currently, if he signs it, put him at the spot that is the third highest annual paid defenseman in the league, just under Erik Karlsson at 11.5 annual, and then Drew Doughty, that beautiful contract, having him at 11 even annual, just above Werenski, who is at 9.58, Seth Jones at 9.5 even, McAvoy at 9.5 even, which to me, I mean, McAvoy and Adam Fox, those contracts are becoming more and more of a steal as the years progress. It really feels like those are absolute studs and beauties of individuals that I like. Wow, 9.5 for a McAvoy is real nice. But moot point, we're talking about Dahlin here. I think 10.5 is beautiful. I think that's fine. It appears on a basic number thing where maybe it's on the top end of what is acceptable to the general public, we'll call it, or the majority. But I just, when I think about it, when push comes to shove, everything on that nature, you just cannot overpay elite talent. And I just wanted to say that one more time. I firmly believe in that. And he is your cornerstone. He is your number one D man. He will be that number one D man. The individual who has the talent and ability to be that number one D man is what now becomes the second question. And what does this mean for Owen Power? This is not a discussion that is, oh, do you pay Owen Power? Do you let him walk or trade him or whatever? That is, you do not do that. The discussion becomes now, okay, you have extended Dahlin 8 years, 10.5 mil annual. He is your number one D man. And if you're setting up negotiations with Owen Power, who is also a number one overall pick, who is a physical specimen still growing in himself after just one full professional year under his belt, he feels he has the potential to be a limitless ceiling, as he should. And I do believe that the ceiling is extremely, extremely high for Owen Power. He would be a number one defenseman in so many different rosters that in organizations that, it's almost unfair to him that we just also are blessed with a Rasmus Dahlin. It is a great problem to have, of course. And the discussion now becomes with Owen Power, who's coming up, needing an extension, is do you give him a bridge deal like Dahlin was treated with? Dahlin's at the time 3 years, 6 million annual, which by the way would most likely just based on natural progression, things like that, where the market is, so on and so forth. You would make the assumption that Owen Power in a bridge deal situation is going to demand just a little bit more than what Dahlin had at his time. So you'd be, let's just for assumption purposes, say 3 years, $7 million annual. Is that the play you want to do where then you have to figure this out in 3 years' time? And to me, after you have seen Dahlin locked in at 10 and a half and understanding where the cap might be in a few years and stuff like that, you could say a bridge deal makes sense. But overall, if you have now the ability to use Dahlin's contract as a benchmark, and Kevin Adams has shown that he is very much willing to lock down long-term potential on the roster with Tage Thompson, and he has been rewarded handsomely for that. And Dylan Cousins been rewarded very, very well and handsomely, honestly, in his own right with that. I almost am willing. It seems crazy after one full season, a good, solid rookie season that Owen Powers have to then go, okay, we're going to now hand you 8 years, $9.5 million. And I think it's in one hand, I can absolutely understand if people would think that's an overpay or if people would say that that is just too much right now, because it's hard for me to disagree at this very moment. At when I, of course, record this on Wednesday nights, Wednesday, September 13th at 11 p.m. Eastern. It is clear that, yes, that would probably be a little bit too much for now a second full year defenseman to get paid. Although he still has one more year on his deal, so I believe it would then be technically starting after this season. So overall, depending on how the contract was written and what bonuses and stuff like that. But anyways, what I would then counter that thought, and what I do counter that thought with and everything, is the fact that in a few years, like I mentioned, the cap could potentially be 7, 8, 9, maybe even $10 million more than what it currently is at, as the ESPN and TNT money pour in, as they finally get rid of that kind of payback situation they have right now with COVID. All of these things where they can finally expand on what the cap is and really start paying players more and more and more. This is all assuming Owen Power's willing to do that. I think the big question is, did Austin Matthews, did even guys like Tyler Bertuzzi, these guys who are taking shorter term contracts and kind of betting on themselves because they can continuously get bigger and bigger paydays, is that now the new gen? What I would say is I would think Owen Power, that's why you're paying him 9.5 if you try to put the 8-year deal in front of him, because even in 2, 3, 4 years, that would still be what you would think. I mean, right now, 9.5, like I just mentioned, Adam Fox right now, who is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth highest annual paid defenseman in the league right now. That would put you on par with him. That would put you on par with McAvoy. It's still putting you on par at this moment in time with the top of the top, which seems excessive a little bit to Owen Power. But in 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to that line will move. That benchmark will change. And that could be seen more as your high-end number 2 defenseman pay, and or even just like kind of still seen as a top 20 defenseman, which Owen Power has the ceiling to be. So, and some, to be honest. So overall, it's partially like the Dahlin point that I made, where you can't overpay for elite talent. There's a little bit more still unknown in my mind, and I think with a lot of people's minds when it comes to Owen Power, where is he truly that elite? I just think he's already shown you enough that if you at least have him in the right situation, if you develop him the right way and let him to continue to grow in a fashion that you're already seeing, it's not inevitable, but you feel really good about the situation it currently is. So I would feel comfortable with that. Getting then Dahlin and Power locked up for the next close to decade at $20 million to me is a very acceptable number for two cornerstone, absolute beast defensemen who, by the end of those contracts, they're both still in the tail end of their prime, if not still in the middle of their primes. That is a great place to be. It's a comfortable place to be. And then now you really know and understand where the entire core of your roster sits financially for the most part. And you can absolutely manage around it, work around it, and figure things out for years on out. I'm in favor now at this point of just kind of 8 years, 9.5 mil, lock these two down. If the 8 year, 10.5 is what Darlene's at, for a total of 20 million for the next 8+ years. And here we go. So it's an interesting conversation to be had. I can't wait to see Darlene's contract become official. I can't wait to see the extension finalized, because I do think it will be a trickle down effect. I agree with a lot of individuals out there who believe that this will eventually lead to whatever's happening with Owen Power, whether it's during the season, whatever happens with that, we will have to wait and see, of course. But it clearly, in my mind, was dependent on Dahlin getting locked up first. And maybe that was a verbal agreement, and then they worked with Power to finalize that situation verbally, and we'll see that. Who knows? That's just pure speculation, by the way. But it's fascinating to see. I can't wait to see a signature on the line. That will be a fascinating thing to follow. But in the immediate future, we, of course, have what I mentioned at the lead of this show, the Prospect Challenge, starting Friday the 15th. The Sabres prospects will open up against Montreal at 7 p.m. on Friday at the Harbor Center. They play New Jersey Saturday at 7 p.m. as well, and then finish against Pittsburgh at 5 p.m. on Monday. There's a fan fest, the annual Sabres fan fest that they like to do, that is happening on the 16th all day throughout. You have alums, a bunch of things. It's definitely a good thing for the families. If you got a family and you're just not doing much on a Saturday, go downtown, go to the Harbor Center area, go that. They do a nice, fun little fan fest. It's a good time. It's a nice, simple time for a lot of people. And then stop on by to the Harbor Center and watch some prospect hockey. It's exciting stuff, because these are guys that both you have individuals who are playing North American hockey for the first time, or on a North American sheet for the first time, uh, getting their pro career kicked off in North America, or finally making that step to the pros from juniors, or whatever it might be, or they're trying to really showcase themselves early on because they want to then lead that into a great preseason where they make Granado and Kevin Adams and all these guys, as they build that day one roster, really think about them before they finalize their depth, before they send anyone else down to Rochester, whatever it may be. So um, it's that first opportunity these guys have to really showcase themselves against opposition, against other prospects, individuals like themselves, that it really gives you kind of a glimpse at the future, but even potentially on who is really progressing well, who might stand out, things like that. There's one guy that I have here kind of that was a standout last year, and it really propelled him into um a really solid season last year with Rochester. I will talk about him later. But I want to go into this a little bit and just talk about a few players that I have my eye on. Like I mentioned before, I have one category where it's the quote unquote obvious names, and I definitely just want to kind of bring them up. Individuals that, if you find yourself out there, if you find yourself searching Twitter, these are names you are probably going to see and everyone loves to see, and you want to see what happens with them. And then maybe a couple more unknown names. And I'll go through the entire roster too, real quick, just to name them all and stuff. But overall, just want to talk about it. And it's fun to have this conversation, get an episode back out there. We get to talk about Sabres hockey next week when I am back on. We will, talk about what had happened, things like that. And then next thing you know, there is preseason hockey happening at, respective arenas around the league. And it just feels like regular season hockey is around the corner. We actually are less than a month away already from that season opener where we are hosting the Rangers. Exciting time. So on onto the prospect challenge here. Just the obvious names and kind of the first name that just has to be brought up. An individual that if you find yourself there, this should be the first guy I believe anyone should be looking at. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, to be quite honest. It's the individual, the center that will be wearing the number 20 sweater. It is Yuri Kulich. It's just, he is the standout in my eyes. He is the guy who really is the one you want to key in on, because from the outside looking in, from understanding what we have all seen in the progression and what we see with this roster and the potential day one lineup that could be, Yuri Kulich to me is a guy who he could absolutely crack the day one roster of the Sabres if he has a great camp, a great preseason, and it all starts this weekend with this prospect challenge. Um, I it's he if I had to bet right now, I don't think he makes the roster. I think that they kind of have the roster in a place where how do I say it? They're comfortable with it right now, I guess is the way to put it. They are satisfied with, say, maybe moving like okay, so you could have Casey Middlestat move up right now in the wing spot of where Quinn has unfortunately vacated due to injury. You have him opposite of Paterka with Cousins centering him. You move Krebs up to the third. You keep Olofsson down there in the third. You have Greenway opposite of him. And then you have who they brought back, Tyson Yost with Gergensons and Okposto. You run that line. I think they like that line a lot, of course, and you just roll with that. If for some reason they still are trying to move Olofsson at this point in time, maybe they try to move him early. If they want to really keep Middlestat as a center, Peyton Krebs them is your fourth line center, and Yost is kind of like your healthy scratch or matchup kind of guy where you bringing him in and out for a Krebs or whatever it else may be, and you view one of those winger spots available. Yuri Kulich, prospect wise, is top of the list. He's the number one guy in my mind. He is the guy that I think has the best chance to crack that. I think he checks a lot of boxes. He was very impressive last year. Overall, I don't bank on it. I expect him to go back down to Rochester, and he will probably thrive down there again. But overall, he is clearly the highlight. The next names, plural, that I will bring up is because to me, this is going to be the most exciting uh, pair to watch. These are the guys that have even written it down here. There should be a highlight of two coming from each of these guys. So these are the ones that you're probably refreshing Twitter the most for to see what comes up with them. And that's center Matt Savoy, who wears the number 93 sweater, and left winger Zach Benson, the number 9 sweater. These guys are basically reunited. And by basically, I mean they are reunited. They were in juniors together. They were a highlight machine back in juniors. And here they are. I would almost expect them to be paired up together during the prospect challenge. There's a natural chemistry, of course. They know what each other likes. If there's any sort of say on who do you want to play with, I would think that these guys are going to want to play together because they can showcase each other very, very well. They got each other into the positions that they find themselves where they were both first-round picks, luckily taken by the Sabres for our sake. Zach Benson, of course, is the shiniest of the new toys. But Matt Savoy, to me, is like the biggest hype machine. It's hard not to love the comparisons of him being potentially the next Danny Briere and everything that comes with that, of course. It's going to be interesting. Hopefully they're on the ice together. That's the first thing I will say. And hopefully they really are exactly what the hype machine appears for them. And they can deliver on that. And Matt Savoy and Zach Benson should be an absolute just highlight reel and a half, and we need to see it. And that's all I'll say on that. Like, I don't expect these guys to crack the roster, especially not Benson. Matt Savoy maybe has an outsider's chance to make some noise. He could be a guy we see called up later on in the season, potentially. depending on how things go, whatever's happening injury wise, roster wise, whatever it is. Or he's just exploding to the point in Rochester where it's like, you got to give this guy a run in the show. But overall, it's going to be fun to watch these guys. And I'm very, very excited and praying that they are on the ice together. And the last name for me in the obvious category that I have here is right winger Isaac Rosen, wearing the number 363 sweater. He's a guy that last year during the Amerks playoff run really took off offensively. He had a great showing. I don't have the stats in front of me. I just know his name was popping up a lot in key moments during their playoff run. And then this is kind of a situation where the last time we saw him with the Amerks, he was doing great. So can he now take that, propel himself forward even more so, continue to make a splash here in the prospect challenge, as well as then carry that into the preseason? And for me, he's another guy who could really crack the roster with a very good preseason and whatnot. But overall, to me, where he sits, like, I don't believe Yuri Kulich is still above him in my mind. But Isaac Rosen could absolutely kind of be one of those priority call ups. He could be one of those guys who is legitimately kind of on the next man up situation for this team, that if they have winger spots that are available due to injury, say a Paterka goes down, say and hopefully none of this happens, of course, but Olafson goes down, whatever it might be, this is a guy who could absolutely, hopefully, come in, plug into the role, and really get some offensive production out of, and just keep continuing on with that, and maybe solidify himself as a Sabre moving forward, or whatever it might be. I mean, these guys all, you would really think these guys all can't make the roster just based on numbers, based on what you have on your current roster. So guys like him could even showcase themselves to the point where they become an absolute top tier prospect in a move you could potentially make down the line for bolstering your roster for a playoff run or whatever it might be, or playoff runs, plural, which is what I feel like Kevin Adams looks for more. He's not obviously a rental kind of guy. He hasn't shown that he ever brings in a rental, although the Sabres haven't been in a position yet for a rental. But overall, I would think it would be more future, like the immediate and the future is in mind anytime he's making a move in a trade. So those are kind of my obvious choices. The few other names I wrote down here that I'm very curious on, guys, I will be seeing if anything pops on the Twitter world, if I make it down there to watch some games myself, whatever it might be. First one on here actually is a left-handed defenseman, Nikita Novikov. He wears the number 91 sweater. This is going to be his first, from what it seems like, this is going to be his first year on North American ice, playing North American hockey, I should say. And he is expected to be in Rochester all this year. He played a couple years in the K. He's coming in from there, but he's a 6'4" left-handed defenseman who also during the 3v3 or 3v3, 3-on-3, I guess it's the same thing. The 3-on-3 French Connection prospect tournament really actually showed some offensive prowess in there. He flashed a little bit. He was a name we heard about, and it's one of those situations where it's like, okay, he's played in the K, so he's played with men. Can he adjust to the North American, game? Hopefully. And he's already shown us that maybe he's not just a big body defenseman. He actually has some offensive game to him. He can skate well, things like that. It's like, if you can kind of get one of those guys, a 6'4" stud like this, to kind of bring in and see what you got out of him. And if he really excels in Rochester and picks up the game quick and builds on the momentum from his first year in Rochester, you could have something special there. You could have something in the works that you really didn't expect, to be quite honest. And that's exciting. I think the physical aspects of Nikita Novikov are exciting. And it's just like, hey, let's see what he's got in this prospect challenge and see if we have something potentially that will be in Rochester that could make some noise down the line and be something for this organization moving forward. The other individual I have written down here is not as surprise of a name, I don't think, because if you followed the Amerks last year in the playoffs, if you follow the prospects and stuff, he is a notable name. He also wears a very notable number. But center Tyson Kozak wears number 48. He had a great prospect challenge in this situation last year, and he turned that into a very solid rookie season with the Amerks. it's funny because statistically, I think he only had 5 points in the playoffs last year for the Amerks. And if you look at a point production standpoint, that is not something that really wows you. But the thing that you see written out there a lot in stuff, and where he really popped for the Amerks, especially in the playoffs, was that he was an extremely reliable defensive minded center. He was a guy that, if at any point you needed someone to lock down the center position, needed to lock down the ice that is maintained by your center defensively, he was the guy that was called upon. He was the one that put in reliable minutes. He is someone that is very trusted by the coaching staff that was there last year with the Amerks, and he rewarded them with that, with positive play. And everything you read about him is that he's an extremely reliable defensive center. He's an extremely reliable two-way guy where he can do what he's needed inside his own blue line and still kind of do things from there. That as a prospect, that's something that I kind of key in on, because if you look at our centers right now, Tage Thompson, I don't need you playing defense, Tage. I want you up the ice scoring your 50 goals. Dylan Cousins, a very good two-way center who still has a very high-end offensive prowess to him. I don't necessarily call him a defensive guru, a defensive genius. But at the same time, I'm not discrediting his back-ended play. I don't discredit him in our own blue line. I think he's a much more well-rounded center, we'll call it, than a Tage Thompson. But again, Tage Thompson puts in, 50 goals. I don't need you playing defense if you put in 50 goals. Peyton Krebs does a good job in his own right. I think he leaves you wanting more at times. I don't know if that's just due to his youth and he's just still trying to grow into himself as a professional. I don't know what it is, but I don't look at him as someone that is a real good lockdown defensive center. I also don't look at him as a stud offensive center. He's kind of one of those just two-way guys who can fill a role decently. He's definitely got toughness to him, but toughness does not necessarily mean defensive, great defensive play, of course. And then Tyson Yost is a sound fourth line center. There's nothing negative about his play, to be honest. He's very vanilla to me, though. It's not overwhelmingly great. So if you have a prospect like a Tyson Kozak, who is potentially a great defensive first center who can really be relied on when it comes to penalty kill situations, or just being a very high end kind of dependable fourth line, even maybe third line center that can better distribute to your third line wingers who you still want to produce offensively, whatever it might be. That is exciting in its own right. I would love to see him still progress as a prospect and see if he can continue to build on what clearly seems like great momentum was had last year that was sparked from this prospect challenge. That is something that is very, very exciting to me. So he was kind of the last guy I wanted to make sure I wrote down on here, because I'm very interested, after he had a good prospect challenge last year, after he had a good season overall with the Amerks, can he continue to build on that and maybe be a defensive center in the works that we can have, that when a bottom six center, whether it's Krebs or Yost or whatever it might be, goes down, maybe he's an individual you hear the name called up and see what he can provide you in your bottom six, because he could be a guy potentially, based on everything you read about him and whatnot, that is dependable in the defensive side of stuff, which I think this team definitely could use, especially with their forwards. Other guys, kind of just to run down the roster here. Of course, I mentioned Zach Benson, Philip Cedar Kvist. I'm going to butcher these names, by the way, absolutely butcher. So I do apologize. Riley Fiddler Schultz, Damian Giroux. Why did I say Giroux? Alexander Kisakov. I already mentioned Tyson Kozak, Yuri Kulich, of course, Dominic Mersch, Ethan man, I'm not even going to bother with this. You can find this roster. I feel so bad. The reason I'm not going through this whole list is because I will absolutely butcher these names, and I haven't heard them enough to hear the pronunciation. I do apologize about that. You can look it up. It's very accessible. The Sabres themselves have put out a thing where you can just pull up a PDF version of the roster even, and just gives you the basic information like hometown, where they were last season, so on and so forth, their point production even. It's funny when you see a Matt Savoy, 38 goals, 57 assists last year. Jeez. It's going to be exciting to watch this. It's the prospect challenge for me does two things. One, gives you a great view on the future, or at least the prospect pool, on what the Sabres truly have. It's clearly looked at as one of the better prospect pools around the league. So is it truly that good? How does it perform in a competitive situation against other teams' prospects? And then where is their value both for the team ourselves, for the Sabres, but then also potentially for trades? It's something that I always keep in mind myself, because you hear all the time, to make big moves, you need to give away high end prospects. This is a time that you can really showcase them to other teams around the league in somewhat game action worth play, on top of what preseason hockey is for a lot of teams as well. So that's one thing. But then two, it's just the start of hockey. Like, there's a reason I titled this episode Sabres Hockey is Back, exclamation point, with the asterisks, of course, because this is kind of that first time now where we are watching real hockey for the Sabres in the blue and gold against other teams and what they are putting up in front. And then right after this, you will see camp and preseason. And next thing you know, we see the day one roster. You see what the final kind of roster looks like. And we are talking about, I will be sitting here talking about at that point in time, what a game will look like between the Buffalo Sabres and the New York Rangers. And I could not be more excited. I appreciate you all for listening. This is shorter than the Metropolitan or the Atlantic Division breakdown episodes. I'm grateful for that. I'm assuming you will be grateful for that too. Thank you for stopping by and listening. I appreciate all of you. Once again, be sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening, I appreciate you as well, of course. Be sure to follow me on Twitter for any updates and stuff. I hopefully will not be missing any more weeks. We will be doing this, of course, dropping every episodes Thursdays at noon Eastern on both Built in Buffalo's YouTube and Bill's Chat YouTube. If you want to follow me on Twitter for all updates and things like that, as the hockey season progresses, I will be more active and try to give you guys all the information I possibly can on this. Follow me at Sabres Chat Pod. Also follow myself and my co-host Josh of Bill's Chat and Bill's Chat Live and everything that we do Bill's content wise at Bill's Chat Pod. We appreciate everything that we do. We like to be a fun platform for all to conversate with, just share our love of these teams, our fandoms, and everything like that. We welcome it. I appreciate all of you one more time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for following along and everything like that. I look forward to next week. I look forward to talking about how this prospect challenge went, how the season's going. Hopefully we have a Dahlin extension locked in. We maybe even have some other news and stuff like that with the Sabres. All positive news, of course. But until next week, I am Luka. You are listening or watching to Sabres Chat, presented by Built in Buffalo. You all have a great rest of your day.